heartbreak is so it annihilates you. It is the hardest, most intense pain and grief to navigate.
You begin to understand that nature has hardwired us for bonding, for staying together, which made sense 1,000 years ago when if you wandered away from your tribe, you probably would die.
Welcome to the Heal with Kelly podcast. I'm Kelly Noonan-Gorse, and every week I speak to the leading doctors, healers, spiritual teachers, and scientists to find out what is truly possible when it comes to healing. I also interview real people with extraordinary healing stories. My philosophy is, what's possible for one is possible for all. Thank you for joining me on this beautiful journey of remembering our divine nature and tapping into the truths that shall set us free.
So just really joining with my new friend here and my new other two friends in the room, just to really align with their mission of spreading the good news of how much power we have, how much choice we have, how much free will we have when it comes to our well-being and our full thriving in life. So we just ask that, first of all, that the entire show be blessed in every episode, and certainly let everything that Kelly's going through deepen her presence on the screen, the heart that she can bring to people in a way that really has people feel connected with her and just fall in love with her, because she truly is your messenger. And in terms of conscious uncoupling, we're just here to serve people who are in so much pain and so prone towards being self-destructive or destructive to others, maybe without even knowing it. We just ask for grace. We ask for goodness. We ask that there is a special dose of magic and miracles that comes out for every listener, so that the Holy Spirit is just washing over them and they get it on the deepest level of their being. May this episode really help and heal thousands and thousands of people and point them in the direction of love. Thank you so much, God.
Thank you.
So it is, so it shall be.
So it is. Wow, thank you.
Yeah. You're welcome.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Heal with Kelly podcast. I'm your host, Kelly Gorse, and we were just led by the beautiful Katherine Woodward Thomas, who is the New York Times bestselling author of Calling in the One, 7 Weeks to Attract the Love of Your Life, and Conscious Uncoupling, 5 Steps to Living Happily Ever After. She is an award-winning...
Even.
Oh, sorry. Oh, yeah. Thank you. And Conscious Uncoupling, 5 Steps to Living Happily Even After. See? The language is so embedded in our psyche that what a great twist on words. She is an award-winning licensed marriage and family therapist, creator of 2 Mind Valley Quests, and has trained thousands of people as certified relationship coaches using her highly transformative methods. She is also the creator of the acclaimed True You process and lead teacher of the True You membership program. Welcome, and thank you so much for that prayer.
Oh, you're so welcome. It's such a joy to be with you. I'm so honored to be, part of your circle and what you're bringing to people.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. And I reached out months ago as I was still, I think, in the valley of grief and kind of mourning the loss of my marriage as it was, and kind of, transformation into something new. And that's what you have done with your work with this incredible book, Conscious Uncoupling, 5 Steps to Living Happily Even After. So maybe let's start by sharing, what is Conscious Uncoupling and what was the spark of inspiration for you to write this book?
Well, the inspiration was I had thousands of people following me for Calling in the One, because I manifest this amazing relationship after decades of struggling in relationship with patterns that were set up in my youth, of course. So you could always trace them back psychologically. They all make sense. But just because you know your patterns, even if you know your beliefs and you kind of know where it all came from and what happened and who did what to you when and all of that stuff, it doesn't necessarily access the power to change your patterns, as we all know. So when I manifest that miracle and life so radically changed, and I called in a really great, healthy relationship with a loving, wonderful human being who was my, I now affectionately call him my husband, and then got pregnant at the age of 43 just naturally. I mean, it was just such a, like, one miracle after the other after the other. I had a lot of people following me and reading the book, and then a decade into the relationship, we decided to divorce. So, I mean, I like to joke with my friends, and I hope people don't take it lightly, but I said, well, I have a little PR problem now, right?
Totally.
You know, I mean, the reality is, but you know, like you, I have to live a life that's true, and that's the most important thing, and you can't, you know, play it safe and dim down who you actually are in the world to try and look good to other people. So at that point, I thought I might lose my career. But the truth is that Mark and I just separated so graciously and kindly, and with a lot of efforts to recreate the relationship that would allow us to co-parent our daughter really well. So there was a lot of integrity in it. And at the end of that process, I thought, wow, that's not the divorce that I grew up with. And it certainly wasn't the divorce he grew up with. We both had parents who divorced, and we both suffered parental alienation and all sorts of tugs of war and, you know, a lot of trauma around divorce. So I started to really think, okay, well, maybe God didn't make a mistake after all, you know, because we go through these things. The first prayer that I think I prayed when I realized we were getting divorced is, you've got to be kidding me. Seriously, what are you thinking? That was my, but, you know, then it ended up being, you know, for the better. And we're, you know, great co-parents today. We still talk. Our daughter's 24, but we still talk on a regular basis. And he's repartnered, I'm repartnered, and we're all very friendly and, you know, send each other birthday cards and all sorts of stuff. So we did really manage to create what I call a happy ever after family. And I wanted to share that with others because I personally know the suffering of having been raised in a home where the divorce was ugly. My parents could not even be in the same room for 40 years after they divorced. And I consider it a great success of mine that I now have them on friendly terms.
Yes.
It took a bit of effort. But I think that Gwyneth made it look really easy, though. I will say that.
And was she a client of yours? Were they your client?
She was the client of someone who was one of my followers.
Okay.
And who had studied with me and knew my work. So he was the one that brought it to her.
Okay. I know who that he is. Okay.
Yeah.
Cool.
And she, you know, I mean, clearly someone told me, I think you got $2 million of publicity on that one, right? One sign on their website.
Gwyneth. Yeah.
So, I mean, I'm really grateful because I think that the name Conscious Uncoupling just kind of communicates a new paradigm of how we might do this better in and of itself. But I will tell you that the book that I wrote is a bit deeper in terms of how gnarly it is and how difficult it is, even for the most conscious of us, because our brains and our biology are not set up to part ways well.
Right, because, I mean, heartbreak is so it annihilates you. It is the hardest, most intense pain and
It is.
grief to navigate. And it was my choice to end the marriage, and I still was like a mess for 6 months, just grieving, you know, the ideal and letting go of that. And then obviously, you know, 14 years of very deep friendship and relationship and habituation and just love and care for each other and family entanglement. It's just a lot to unwind. I think it's so ironic and also perfect that you know, had the calling and the one for this perfection and then the divorce. But like that's life. And I think that, you know, so many people, it's almost a metaphor for this like divorce where we honor and exalt longevity, But the people that, so many people that are married 50, 60 years have been miserable and have no connection in their
I
marriage.
remember in graduate school, I was reading an article that shocked me, and I don't remember the therapist who'd written the article. I actually spent weeks looking through everything I had to try and find it and never really came upon it again. But the wisdom stayed with me, which is don't celebrate the marriage of someone who's celebrating 50 years together until you recognize what that union has done to their souls. And we do kind of honor, inside of the happily ever after myth, we do really honor the longevity of relationships. And we have kind of this collective assumption that if a marriage ends before one or both people die, that it's a failure, that somebody did something very wrong, or that the love wasn't viable to begin with. And I think that's part of the shame that we all sink into at the end of a relationship. So when I was getting divorced, I felt a lot of the things that most of us feel. I felt some level of social embarrassment, of course, because a little double dose of my position.
Heightened.
But I also, had enough wherewithal to know that I'd worked with enough people to know that I'm not the only one who goes into shame and self-doubt and starting to feel socially inadequate or or embarrassed or whatever we go through that's very typical and common, or the beating ourselves up and making ourselves wrong, feeling bad about the choices we've made or doubting ourselves. All that's very common at the end of love that really stems from the happily ever after standard that we hold ourselves and each other accountable to. So I'm a little bit of a kind of a closet cultural anthropologist, and I stepped back from it and I thought, well, who created that standard? Like, where did that come from, right? We're all in an evolving universe, and these conversations live for us like God made the mountains, God made the sun, and God made marriage for forever, and if you don't make forever, then you failed. And I did some research on it. It's basically 400 years old, which is a hiccup on the timeline of human beings. And it was created at a time when the lifespan was less than 40. People had no real mobility. They were kind of locked into a lower class. If you notice, the happily ever after myth always has upward mobility, and everybody living happy, ever after forever. So it was actually an escapist fantasy, these fairy tales that came out 400 years ago because people's lives were so hard. But the reality of our day, according to Helen Fisher, the late Helen Fisher, who is a great romance anthropologist, is that serial monogamy is what the new norm is. So very, very few of us are going to meet one person, mate with that person, and stay with that one person for the rest of our lives. So why are we holding ourselves to that standard? If we're updating our parenting techniques, we're updating our dietary plans, we're updating our medical treatments.
Technology,
right? Why are we not also updating how we separate from each other? So if you look at like the family law system, which has become so cumbersome that nobody can really do that without an attorney, although there's new things on the horizon that people are combating that with, some very, very, wonderful ways to get separated without getting into that, because the legal system is kind of based upon somebody's wrong. Somebody needs to be punished. Somebody needs to pay.
The longer we discuss it, the more hours we can bill.
Exactly. And then there's that conflict of interest. And of course, people are so generally upset. And if you get into the legal process or legal battles, you bring that emotional upset with you into that. You can go through your kids' college funds really quickly, just to be right, because we're so hardwired for fairness, or we're just out of our minds needing to defend ourselves. We're just not in our right minds. The other thing that happens is that even the most generous and kind-hearted and spiritual people are vulnerable to getting kind of petty and mean-spirited when we go through a divorce, which shocks us because maybe we don't even know ourselves that way. But that's very, very common. And if you really look at what's happening in the brain and in the body, you begin to understand that nature has hardwired us for bonding, for staying together, which made sense 1,000 years ago when if you wandered away from your tribe, you probably would die. So we go into this high threat, life-death kind of battle. And, we're apt to just kind of, do all sorts of things that are outside of our character.
Yes, I'm like mentally preparing because we haven't started any sort of legal conversation, and we're good. I'm his fourth wife, so this is not his first rodeo. He's got 6 kids. He's done a phenomenal job of keeping all, he always respected all the moms regardless of behavior, and he just wanted, his biggest thing was like making sure the kids were okay and that they all loved each other and stayed together. So
that's fabulous.
He operates in as conscious a way as he knows how, that has been very effective. So but we know it's eventually and probably very soon. So I'm glad we're talking today, because as much personal development and spiritual work I've done, I am able to get triggered, and things have occurred where I can easily see myself sinking in and like baring my teeth,
Well, I always think of breakups or divorce as a litmus test of character, because those impulses are real. And, the impulse to defend, the impulse to grab at things, or to go into fear and threat, it's kind of part of the territory. So how we deal with that will reveal our character. The Japanese have a saying that says, you don't know your wife till you divorce her.
Hello. Yes, I love that. I love that. Hell hath no fury, but a woman scorned.
Yeah.
It's so good. So I think, we can get into the 5 steps, but what I commonly see my friends going through, or even just as you're saying, like we haven't given space for the evolution, or the upgrade or the updating of this system. And, I do a lot of personal development work. My husband's 26 years older, Middle Eastern, like just a little culturally, just, not into the same things I'm into. And so, like, it would make sense that I've become, between 31 and 46 years old, a woman changes a lot, right? And perhaps his age, he's not changing very much. So at a certain point, I guess my question is, in this conscious uncoupling, how do you go through, if only one party is interested, and I'm not applying this to us because he does things very consciously in a lot of ways. But if it's very vitriolic and, or you're dealing with someone that's not stable or abusive or whatever, how can you just go through this process and still bring positive results?
I think one of the myths also that went out with Gwyneth and Chris is that only very conscious, wealthy people do this together as a couple. And that is not who the work is for. Okay. Most of the people who come to me are people who are struggling with a very angry, punitive partner who's out for the jugular, who wants to do things like take their children away from them, who's threatening them financially. These are the people who are really suffering with heartbreak. I will also just say that the process, the 5 steps I created, can be used for anyone who is anticipating a possible breakup because they're seeing the writing on the wall and they want it to go well, so they're preparing themselves about how this is going to go. Someone who's in that kind of difficult breakup, even if it's, conscious like you and your soon-to-be husband are in, and but mostly people who are really struggling with this kind of behavior, or someone who's even on the other side of it but can't get over the heartbreak. So the process, one of the things that the process does for people is it puts you in the center of your wise self, your mature self, the part of you that can actually consider the consequences of each action you take, so that you are actually, your highest, best self is driving the car. And when we do that, we actually are able to kind of lower the temperature of the other person. We actually have to be the leaders. What happens is when someone is behaving badly, they end up becoming the leaders of how this is going, because the other person who's actually more conscious goes into reaction and fear, and then you're just in reaction to the other person. So conscious uncoupling helps us to not buy into that and to elevate the quality of the connection. Let me give you an example, right? Very, very concrete example. How do we do that? So one woman I know had a 4-year-old son. Her husband cheated on her. He left her. He was already living with this other woman. They wanted the son. So they were really mean to her, really bad-mouthing her. They were priming the son. They were just bad-mouthing her, all sorts of, your worst nightmare kind of situation.
I can relate.
So, of course, she was in terror, reaction. You can't fight somebody like that because she's not an evil person. Like, she's actually genuinely a nice person. So she's really out of her league trying to deal with this behavior. So what she started to do because of conscious uncoupling is she would start to kind of disarm him and his girlfriend with being very decent and very thoughtful. So, for example, he got sick, and so when her son came home, he said, "Daddy's sick." So she called the girlfriend and she said, "I want to tell you the recipe of the soup that he really loves when he's sick." And that just disarmed them. It just had them, surprised by the decency of it. So she ended up elevating the quality of the connection, and he backed off of trying to get sole custody of his son. Right? So that's what I mean about being the leader. So you really have to be in your center, the highest and the best, when you're navigating. So whoever has the highest consciousness is going to be the leader. So that's actually, I'm skipping to step 4. So the conscious uncoupling process, the first 3 steps are your own inner work.
Okay.
Because we're so out of our minds. We're so scared. We're so angry. We're so obsessive. We're so ashamed. You can't navigate from that place of hurt. And so the first 3 steps are all your own inner work, and we can go more deeply into that if you're interested. But the 4th and the 5th step are like, how do you deal with this person now? Right? So that's actually part of step 4, what I just said.
Yes. Oh my gosh. Exactly. I wrote down the clearing the air is part of step 4, and I was like, as you're talking about who would be right for this book, I wish I had read. I thought this was like in the divorce process, but I wish I had read this in the 2 years that we were kind of discussing and going to therapy and seeing if this marriage would work. And there was other things, like I potentially wanted to have another child. So we did everything kind of, I think we tried everything.
Yeah.
But I was very much in the mindset of the way he operates doesn't work for me, rather than really seeing my patterns and showing up and how I was 50% responsible for how I showed up in the relationship too. Not to say that I blamed him for everything, but there's now, in this reflection and all the work I've been doing in the last few months, and understanding my attachments and my childhood that's mirroring and showing up in these relationships. I wish I would have given the one thing. I just wish I could have been a little bit more radically responsible and done some of these communication exercises to see if we could have started to shift things. But ultimately, I know that's absolutely the right evolution for both of us. But this clearing the air exercise, I think everybody needs to do this in any sort of conflict.
Well, that's why I tell people, first of all, breakups, I think, are a crossroads. And they can be so painful that many people kind of close down to relationships after they close their heart. They get more defended. So, in other words, they live a lesser life in the aftermath of a bad breakup. But you can also use the breakup to expand your capacity to love and be loved, so that you feel confident moving forward that this could never happen again, and the next relationship is so much better, because I'm actually teaching core skills that have relationship thrive as a way to actually separate. But once you know how to do that in the most stressful of circumstances, it becomes more organic for you to be able to do that moving forward in relationships. So the clearing the air, and you're right about this. I mean, this is where couples just process and process and process, and they can't clear it and they can't get around it, and they can go on like that for weeks or months or years. So what I'm saying in the clearing the air is you have to set your own explanations aside. This is not about getting the other person to understand why you did what you did. And even if you think that their perspective is completely ridiculous and completely incorrect, that they really shouldn't feel that way because you didn't actually do that, right? They're misinterpreting it because that's how it is for us.
Yes.
You know, that's what's happening. What the clearing the air exercise does is it just has you set all of that to the side and just listen to someone and get into their universe. Whether they're right or wrong does not matter. You're just listening to how it landed for them and what they're suffering with. You know, even for something as benign as you walked in the house and said, "How are you today?" Right? That was some deep wounding for them because of some tone that you had or something on your face. You looked a certain way. And you just get related to that and you just mirror it back. Right? We know mirroring, you know, from couples work and, you know, it's good, you know, to mirror, but the mirroring has to be genuine. It can't just be, well, I hear that you feel this way.
Yeah.
You know?
You crazy mofo.
Yeah. Exactly. You have to be in your heart a little bit, like with some compassion. This is a person you've loved. This is a person you've spent a lot of time with and slept with for a while. And, you know, maybe you had their children or whatever you did with them. So you try and remember that in that moment. And you say, wow, I'm really sad to hear that for you that really was painful. And I just wasn't even aware that was creating so much pain. And then, so you're just being with them.
Seeing, acknowledging.
You're not going into your own stuff about, well, my father used to say it to my mother.
Yeah.
Okay, because that derails the conversation. And what you're going to be doing then after that is you're going to make an amends. So you're either going to say to the person, I'm going to never do that to you again. Or if you're actually separating and you don't have a chance to make it up to them, you might say, you know, thank you for making me aware of that. I will really do my best to never hurt someone else like that again in the future. So it's the amends that actually begins to clear the air, where it just kind of disappears. It dissipates. We're not carrying it, so that when you walk into the same room and you're at a party and you both arrived, there's not a tension. You're not holding your breath, or your kids, if you have them, aren't, you know, navigating the tension of that's being not spoken while everybody's got plastic smiles on their faces. So it's not just about saying the right thing. It's about actually being the right person, where you're clear, you're at peace with that person, you've forgiven yourself for the mistakes made, you have, you know, forgiven them. I also want to say that one of the other myths that I think Gwyneth and Chris kind of initiated, you know, it wasn't there that they did that, but this is one of the things that we kind of collectively, you know, went into, is it somehow Conscious Uncoupling is advocating friendship on the other side of this. And a lot of times the relationships break up because people behave very, very badly, and they haven't been a good friend. So I'm an advocate for friendship is earned. I see friendship as a very high form of love. I don't see it as a demotion from romantic love.
I love that.
And I think that what we're trying to do is just get complete and be at peace. So we're not carrying around resentment that's going to end up, you know, poisoning our bodies or limiting love in the future because we're walking in so defended. It's really about getting complete. So part of the clearing the air is there's lessons to be learned. I mean, all of us show up in ways that we just think we're being ourselves, and we have every right to be that way, and we don't even realize that we're offending somebody else or we're hurting their feelings. So this is a good thing for us to learn in a relationship moving forward. In all healthy relationships, sometimes we hurt each other's feelings unknowingly, or we just don't even agree that should have been a hurtful thing. But now, if you're in a mature love, you care that your partner feels that way. So then you might adjust your own behavior accordingly, or, you know, talk it out more in a way that has space for them to be who they are. So, you know, that's why I say that's one of the skills you would carry into your next relationship.
I think this is like the nugget, or for me, this is what I've been experiencing, and not in a romantic relationship, but in some certain, like, work relationships and a couple of people that work for us. And I'm like, wow. And it's kind of this conflict that I didn't even know had existed, that these harboring resentments. And when we discuss, it's like our realities are completely different, to the point where I'm like, am I going insane? Like, this is so mind-blowingly not coherent with my reality.
Right.
But to have this container to understand, whether it's romantic or in the workplace or with friends, that our lenses are all covered by our trauma, our nervous system wiring, our attachment styles, all of these things are coloring the lens, and we're interpreting reality from that lens.
Right.
So just to have that practice when any conflict arises, and just like, we just want to be validated in our experience.
Yeah.
And then not hear someone justify or deny or explain, but just hear. And if we could all acknowledge that we're all kind of living different versions of reality, with true love and friendship and, productive co-working relationships, like, we have to have this space where we can share what our experience was, be heard, make amends, and then move forward. It's like so
well, it
crucial.
deepens the connection, because you recognize that someone is different than you, and you learn about them. A lot of us are conflict avoidant, but if you avoid conflict, it means you're never deepening the relationship. And what you just described so elegantly that's how we deepen the process of getting to know each other. And I think that what you're saying is really wise, that we all have different lenses and we're interpreting life differently. And it's important that we learn the lenses of the people who are close to us, and not be held hostage to those lenses, but at least be aware and sensitive, because we do want to cultivate the capacity to actually be respectful and to care for one another. A lot of times people think that it's love that needs to be sustained over time in a relationship, a long-term relationship, but I think it's actually respect.
I love that. Yes. Yeah. I would love to talk a little bit about patterns and attachment styles, and whether you're newly dating and you're like, one's avoidant and one's anxious, and it's just like this push-pull, or you keep kind of attracting the same relationship over and over, and until that kind of negative pattern comes to the surface to be acknowledged and healed, you're going to keep doing it. So talk to us a little about that, so people can become aware of how they are, that is their responsibility. Is their subconscious, so they're not aware of it, but our responsibility is to become aware of why we're attracting these people. We may be a real victim in a moment, but at the same time, we're responsible for wondering why we've co-created this experience, and over and over and over, and how to shift it.
Well, I really appreciate the question, and I love that you're kind of leading all of us in that direction, because this is, I think, the leading edge of all of our growth right now, is to recognize how we are generating our own experience. If I ask somebody, and I'm a psychotherapist by trade, so, in my profession, when I was in private practice, people would come in their patterns, and the first place I wanted to look was their history. How did this happen? How did this get all set up for you? But what I recognized is that while that conversation is important and critical, and it's a big part of healing to go back and say, well, this happened with your father, and as a therapist, I'm going to validate that this mattered, and that you have a right to be hurt about that, or offended, or it crushed you in some way, and the trauma was real. So these are a lot of the traumas that we're still suffering with are the attachment traumas. But what I've since discovered also is that healing is a different domain than transformation.
Ooh, okay. I love this direction of the conversation.
So healing is really about being able to go back to where in our bodies our nervous systems got derailed. It's about being able to validate and hold ourselves, to learn how to love ourselves in the way that we weren't loved in the way that we need it to be. All these beautiful ways that we kind of weave ourselves back to the land of the living. I was in therapy off and on probably for 20 years. It's the wonderful thing about living a long life is you kind of get to experiment with yourself for a while. But I still, and even though I'd done so much great work on myself, I still had really toxic patterns with men. I had toxic patterns about feeling underactualized professionally. I had, deprivations showing up in my finances. So I like to say that the work that I did around looking backwards, saved my life in many ways, but it didn't necessarily change my life because it didn't change the patterns. So where the patterns actually change is you have to begin to resource yourself from the future that's calling you. Okay, so when you set an intention to manifest something that you haven't been able to create, and you really stand, when I say set an intention, it's different than a goal, or it's different than something you want to do. An intention, the moment you set an intention, you're actually saying, I'm going to hold myself accountable to being who I need to be in order for that intention to manifest.
I love that. Yes.
Right? So at the end of a relationship, you might say, my intention is to have an extraordinary love on the other side of this where I feel completely met. And we are partnered at the deepest level with so much love, so much respect, where we are standing looking out at the world in one direction, unified, where we are, prioritizing each other's health and happiness. We are each other's best friend and biggest advocates, right? So you're going to just, out of the dust and the ashes of what your experience is, Conscious Uncoupling also encourages people to take a really bold stand for the future. So that future begins to pull us forward. I know you love Michael,
Yes.
and Michael said pain pushes till vision pulls, right? So what he means by that is that when we set an intention and begin to try on the self of the future, which I know is a part of your practice because I've listened to you. It's a great part of your practice. You model that for us. What it is it's a different self. So at the end of love, what you're organically prone to being left with is the what I call the source fracture story. The story of I'm not good enough, nobody wants me, or I'm all alone, see, I'm all alone. Remember that song Alone Again, Naturally, Gilbert O'Sullivan? It was a while ago, but it sold like 2 million copies. Diana Krall sings it now with Michael Bublé. She's got a great rendition of it. But I call it like, I think that's like the ode to the false center. It's like, here I am all alone again. Nobody's here with me. I might as well just, and we all have it. And that's what we're left with, that identity of the source fracture story. And even if, and why that's so toxic at the end of love is that beliefs are relational. They were created in relationship to your early caregivers, and they're only transformed in relationship with others. So if you were getting triggered in the relationship and you were behaving in a way that kind of convinced the other person that you really aren't good enough, you were shrinking yourself, you were self-abandoning and people-pleasing, all sorts of stuff that we do to try and keep the relationship disappearing, your true voice. The other person loses respect for you, and they begin to hold you like that. Well, she really isn't good enough. I deserve someone who has more confidence, or whatever it is. Who doesn't let themselves go like that, or whatever it is. They've got a story on you. And even if you're not seeing that person because you've been with them and very intimate with them, you feel them. So if they're holding a story about you as less than who you are, you can maybe not see that person for a year and still feel diminished in your sense of self. So one of the things that we look at in Conscious Uncoupling is how do we get you in the truth of who you are? And then how do you I actually give people what I call a soul-to-soul practice, where they can call in the soul of that person even if they don't want to see them. And if I tell people, if you're scared of that person because they were mean, make them like really tiny and you're really big and put a firewall between you.
Yes.
But just actually have a conversation from the truth of who you are. And you have to own, I know that I underpresented myself, and I know that I acted small in the relationship. And I gave you the message that I was less than who I am. And I really need you to know that that's not what's so about me. What's so about me is I'm powerful, I'm desirable, I'm a loving person, I'm a wise person, I'm a mature person, and I am worthy of your respect. And I ask that you hold me in that light. So what we're doing is we're recalibrating the sense of self. Now that sense of self where I said I'm worthy, I'm powerful, that comes by leaning in and listening for the future that you're living into.
Yes.
That's who we are coded to become. And we have to begin to identify with the self of the future and really claim the truth of who we are. Because if you're in a false center and somatically identified with, and Dick Swartz uses the word blended with, that younger traumatized self, you won't be able to realize the self of your future. And I think that a lot of us are unhappy, not because we are, we suffered, setbacks and woundings in our childhood. I think we're unhappy because inside of being overly identified with the self that we formed in response to those wounds, that we're out of alignment with who we're coded to become. That's the suffering.
I totally agree. Beautifully said. Can you just expand on, you noted the source fracture, but can you define what source fracture is so people can kind of maybe become awake to what theirs might be?
Yeah. So first of all, it's a subjective conversation. There's no rocket science of a source fracture story. We're talking about consciousness and we're talking about beliefs. But source fracture stories are the beliefs at the level of identity.
Okay.
And generally, if one had, let's say, a negligent parent, one parent left, the other parent was working 12 hours a day, so you were left alone a lot. It's very common then to form a source fracture story of, I'm alone, no one's here for me, or other people always leave me, and I can never get my needs met by anybody. And inside of that particular narrative, so I might be 6 years old when I create that story, that sad story, which, by the way, somebody who has that as a primary base or a default where we go to when they get hurt or threatened or scared or disappointed is the big one, the big trigger for that. There'll be a low-grade depression. Because if that were really true, that you could never get your needs met, depression is actually the appropriate response. So they have an energy to them, all of them. I actually have a new book coming out in a few months that's called What's True About You. And I break them down into 22 most common false centers.
Oh, great.
And how are the source of them. So inside of this I'm alone story, how are the source of it then? At the age of 6, you just start already developing self-sufficiency to the extreme. You don't really need anybody. You can do it all yourself. Thank you very much. You have a way of being in relationship with people where you avoid conflict like the plague because conflict is perceived as the beginning of the end. And so then what you're doing is in your relationship with yourself, you're acting out I am alone. Because you're self-abandoning constantly to just join the other person's world. Okay? So there's all sorts of ways that we actually generate aloneness. And there's also a way that we stop being vulnerable with other people because we don't anticipate that anyone would be there for us inside of that self-sufficiency. But if you're not vulnerable with people, how it lives for them is you don't need anything from them. And they kind of leave you alone because you've got it all handled over here. And they also don't fall in love with you. Because we don't fall in love with people because we admire them. We fall in love with people because they're vulnerable. So this is an attachment trauma, right? The I am alone. All of the false centers are actually attachment wounds.
Well, you're going to have to come back on the podcast and break those down when that book comes out.
So conscious uncoupling, this is in step 3. of conscious uncoupling. And what the focus is name it and claim the deeper truth of yourself, mentor that younger you, and then correct it in how you're holding this other person. So you break the spell that you're under, and that's like a handicap. We're either sponsoring each other or we're cursing each other energetically. Yes. That's what's so. And if you've been with somebody who has a big story about you, you really have to get bigger than their story. And you also have to take responsibility for having shown up in the relationship that allowed them to come to that conclusion about you, that false conclusion.
Yeah. Yes. I want to talk a little bit more about the soul to soul, because in your book, for me, like the quantum, and we've all had this experience where, I noticed it even with my ex, like I said, he's not actively doing personal development work, and he's very successful. So part of him doesn't really want to change because they're afraid that if they change or do anything differently, the formula for success
it's
might,
working.
It's working. Why change?
Him. Yeah. Right. But not, because he's losing you, which is a big loss.
Oh, well, not losing, right? We're going to happily even after.
You know what? I think we have to honor the loss, though.
Yeah.
And there are multiple losses. So we make space for that without judgment.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's
and
true.
you can create something beautiful on the other side of it, too.
Yeah, that's true. That is true. But I found that when I did the work and I took responsibility and looked at myself, or I shifted something and I stopped blaming and I just kind of did my own shifting, he would rise up to meet me. It was just a very quantum thing that happened over and over until it stopped working. But, you have great examples in the book, and, with Frank, and how you had this soul-to-soul conversation, and then that shifted after years. I don't know if you want to share an example or talk about entanglement, but this soul-to-soul exercise you just described, it really, and I've had higher self conversations with someone that I couldn't have the human conversation with. Yeah. And miracles can happen.
Yeah, they really do. It is definitely a little woo-woo. What was it? Was it Einstein that called it spooky distance or something?
Yes.
Yeah, it's been around for a while. People have been documenting it, but it is a wild card. And I'll tell the story about Frank. Okay.
I think it's so cool.
Yeah. My high school boyfriend, Frank. So we broke up. We had a very traumatic breakup when I was 19. And we had been planning our lives together. We had our kids named. We were just so in love all through high school. And I did it just so traumatically and horribly, and I really hurt him. But it kind of cut off our being able to go back and maybe heal that together when he got engaged to the next person he started dating, who, my name was Kathy at the time, so her name was Kathy too.
Of course it was.
Of course, right? So, and then he got married. So that just ended it. And then they had 3 children. So I could never go back. But I lived with this longing and this deep regret and this sadness that I had hurt him so desperately. And it was messy. And so fast forward to years later when I'm doing the Calling in the One process. And Calling in the One is about just clearing any inner obstacle that might be getting in the way. And I think there was this little part of me that was holding out hope that maybe Frank would one day come back to me. So, this is 20 years later, right? But I'd been dreaming about him and all sorts of stuff. So part of Calling in the One, I'm just ruthlessly clearing everything that's in the way. And I do this little soul-to-soul meditation. I'm not going to call him. He's married. I don't want to disrupt his life. So I bring him in my meditation. I say, Frank, I want to have a conversation with you. I've been holding on to you all these years, and I need to let you go now because I have a commitment to call in the One by my 42nd birthday, and this is getting in the way. So please forgive me for hurting you, and I love you, and I'm letting you go now. And when I got off the cushion, I just felt kind of free and lighter, and that worked. A few tissues later. So fast forward 8 years later, I write this in the Calling in the One book, and I And I hear from this person who was part of our little social circle, Frank and my social circle, and he's all excited. He found me, which was no small feat because my name was completely changed. I have no idea how he figured out it was me. But he did find me, and he contacts Frank. And he sets up a call between Frank and I. And Frank and I get on the phone. This is like 20-something years later, right? This is a long time after we broke up, 28 years or something. And so we're talking. It was very emotional. And we're talking, we're sharing, and I'm telling him how much regret I had held on to for years. And then I share with him about, everything that I had been doing 8 years ago. And he said, you know what? I used to dream about you too. And you were a big problem in my marriage because I had pictures of you and I didn't want to let them go. And he said, I felt really sad for a lot of years. And I said, well, when did that end? And he thought about it. He said, I don't know, maybe 8 years ago.
Oh my God. That's crazy.
Isn't that crazy?
Yes. And no. It's like.
And no.
Yes.
And no. So, I mean, it's kind of bad news when you're breaking up with someone to think that you're going to stay that connected with someone. Mm-hmm. But it really is pointing the way towards we have to get complete. Mm-hmm. We have to make amends to ourselves, really, first and foremost, about what we tolerated, what we settled for, how we never spoke up for ourselves, or whatever we did that we regret. And the amends is I'm promising myself to do it differently in the future. But then we actually have to go back and just complete that relationship, even without the other person. Often without the other person. And even if you're friendly like Mark and I, there's things that I did around Mark that I never told Mark about. I didn't need to process all of this with Mark because sometimes the processing endless stuff, trying to clear it all, is just another way of staying safe. Staying connected. We have to be onto the brain's little trick because the brain is going to keep us connected in any way that it can. Because as I said, we're not hardwired to come apart. We're hardwired to bond. That's what soulmate to soul hate is. Because hate is high engagement. We have to be aware of all these tendencies. So even the over-processing, I want to get this person's permission before I leave, or I need them to understand why I did what I did. They need to forgive me. All of that is still trying to hold on, as opposed to coming home to ourselves, getting back into integrity, learning the lessons, growing in a way, turning that post-traumatic stress into post-traumatic growth, and graduating from old patterns once and for all by showing up differently with other people in the future.
I love it. Just because I witnessed two different people in my life going through kind of really bitter divorces where one of the husbands is like just marriage at all costs, but like stonewalls her, there's no communication. And the other husband is like a complete narcissist, cheated on her, just a kind of a disgusting human being. Wow. And narcissistic and gaslighting, and just this woman suffered serious abuse mentally and physically. And so in this process, like, to stay strong in boundaries, but not be, so you're not manipulated and you can like fight. But I imagine the soul to soul, like what would it be an example of a soul to soul conversation to stay conscious and generous in this process, even though you're dealing with just a horrific human?
Well, you're being generous really to be able to graduate out of the relationship. Sometimes people get like, well, I've been giving so much. Why do I have to be the one to give now in the breakup? You're not doing it for the other person. You're doing it for you. So the kind of generosity is, you're not giving away the house or, over giving too much. I do, encourage people to advocate for what's fair. But I think a soul to soul with someone who's really misbehaving. First of all, before we do the soul to soul, I've invited people to really look at their part. And usually if you're with someone who's very narcissistic, you have a particular way of hiding your needs early on in dating so that you're kind of auditioning to be the perfect person. and you have a way of making yourself a little bit invisible, where you can really see the other person and everything that they need and everything that they desire, and you kind of morph yourself into that. So you're presenting an inauthentic version of yourself. And what happens for people is they're so insecure in the beginning that they create that dynamic. Then they get really bonded with the other person because they've never actually said, well, I disagree with that, or I don't see it that way, or I need this instead of what you're giving me. So they never actually find out how limited the other person is. All they can see is, all the charm and all the, bells and whistles that come along with narcissism. Okay. So, and I say early dating is, be a little bit of trouble because you don't agree with everything. Be yourself. Ask for something that's inconvenient from the other person, because that's how you're going to discover their character. So if your MO is to disappear yourself and not tell somebody that you need something because you're trying to appear low maintenance or like the perfect person.
Why are you nailing me right now? Just get out of my head. Yep.
Then that's the consequence of that.
Okay.
So in the soul to soul now, the amends you make to yourself is you say, I'm sorry for being so inauthentic and pretending that I had no needs and setting you up in a way that kind of blindsided you. You didn't realize what you were marrying, and that was inappropriate of me. That was me doing what I call pseudo safety structure. It's like not real safety. It's like a 4-year-old's version of safety, right? So I did something that was, I did a bait and switch for you. So I will never do that again to anyone else. And I will show up as my authentic, full, pain in the tushy self whenever I need to be right from the beginning with someone. I will tell them I need this, and I need this, and I need this. And if you're not giving me something, I'm going to call you on it, and that's okay. Not that I'm going to be like a real pest about it.
Yeah.
But here's the thing, if you have it like you can't have any needs, what we do is none of us want to be needy. God forbid we're needy, right? So we throw all our needs out. Like somehow we shouldn't need someone to treat us as though we matter, and listen to what our feelings are and kind of recalibrate who they're being, because they're going to accommodate that, at least to care or try. These are appropriate adult needs. So the amends to yourself is to start doing that now in the future with everybody, and not present that perfect you anymore, because it wasn't true. And then when you get into the marriage or the relationship, of course, you're upset because the other person's that way. So again, back to the soul to soul. You might say to the other person, I don't know if you'll ever see me, but I see myself. And I hope one day you can. And I'm a woman who's worth being seen, and I'm a woman who's worth being met. And I wish you well. And I hope you grow from this experience too. God bless you.
Love that.
Yeah.
And just to be clear, I was the abusive dude that I called horrific is not my relationship. It was someone else's. And then I was listening to you talk about what we do and how we try to be low maintenance, and kind of may or may not be doing that.
I know it because I've lived
right
it.
now. Like, shit.
I know these things way too intimately.
Yeah. So, note to self. Yeah, it's good. And again, like, I definitely, part of my decision to uncouple is because I woke up one day and realized how much I was sacrificing, and then not getting my needs met, and then also fully me, like I had abandoned myself, and he was just following suit. So, and then when you start to change and when you start to have needs, it's very jarring for someone after 12 years of being completely different, Right. So it is, and I love, like, it's true, we try to show our best sides and play this role in the honeymoon phase, and and men never want the woman to change, and then of course, because that's unsustainable, we always do change, and you know what I mean? It's just so funny. It's like, but just be yourself, and then the relationship, if it's meant to be, it will, and if it won't, you know what I mean?
Well, I think relationship is, we're evolving relationship right now. If you think about 60 years ago, back in the 50s or 60s or whenever that was, 60, 70 years ago, there really was only one person in the relationship. It was the man of the house.
Yeah.
And everybody else kind of organized around him. So the partnership model was a role-based relationship, and it also was kind of a narcissist, co-narcissist, although, obviously not everybody was a narcissist, but you understand there was only really one
Societal
person.
structure would have.
It wasn't a
man
love
kind of
between
be-
equals,
Yes.
that's for sure.
Yes.
So the new model of relationship that we all are aspiring to, particularly those of us who are on a consciousness path, is a love between equals. Yes. And we don't actually know how to do that very well yet. Okay, so none of this is to beat ourselves up or pathologize ourselves. We're evolving consciousness quickly right now, and relationship is a moving train. And how wonderful that we want to have a love between equals. But then that means we have to tolerate, going back to what you were talking about before, two people in the room. Like, wow, you see it that way? That's amazing, because that would never even occur to me.
Yeah.
Right? So you have two people in the room. How do we respect each other's worldviews? How do we accommodate each other's worldviews without sacrificing too much of ourselves? How do we not get really reactive when we get triggered? How do we minimize our triggers so that we can stay in an adult consciousness to work things out that are difficult, as opposed to going back into our child self and starting to create mishigosh from there?
Yes. Okay, well, then I'm just going to continue asking for a friend. If we have enough awareness that we're like, okay, let's say my friend Cindy is dating someone that is clearly like an avoidant style, and also still healing from a heartbreak, and so not fully emotionally available. And there's some fear there. Like Cindy can see all that.
Right.
Without playing the game, how can what's the best way to show up but also be sensitive to the fact that there may be very kind of pushed back on someone that's like, do you know what I mean? If you're aware of it, and then you also, so you don't want to dim your light or manipulate or play a game. So you want to be your full self, but you're sensitive to their kind of little vulnerability right now.
Yeah. Well, I think you do have to know what their relationship goals are, what they're wanting for themselves, and how interested they are in their own personal development beyond that, that prickly defensiveness, that in and out game. And you need to know that before you get yourself too emotionally attached. That's the game. So, or invested. So it might be, if someone were doing that to me. Look, Sue Johnson, who's the founder of Emotionally Focused Therapy, said that the most important question that any of us ever have in relationship is, are you there for me? And if you're putting all your eggs in the basket of someone who, and the answer is actually, well, maybe sometimes, that's on you. So is it hard to not do that? Yes. But there's also might be something for her to look at if she's pulling in someone who's emotionally unavailable, that, for her, that might be a safety structure for her too, because she's not in a committed relationship too. And I would encourage her to look there and say, what's really going on for me? Because this is the thing with someone with really secure attachment. They might date that person, but the moment that the person started to be kind of in, out, they take their marbles and go home and start looking for someone else to date. They would not be interested in that person. Okay. So if she is getting hooked on that, that's something about her. And because she's forming an attachment to someone who can't be there for her, which means that she doesn't really have to be there for him either.
Right.
Yeah.
Yep. Nailed it. Cool. Thank you. I will let Cindy know.
Okay.
Amazing. So I guess I'm excited about your next book. I'm just curious.
Yeah.
Since it's been a minute since Conscious Uncoupling has come out, Is there a new awareness you wish you could have included as like another step, or is there something that you would go back, just like how we evolve, you know? Is there something in a new edition that you would add or subtract?
You know, it's interesting, of course, right? So books are hard that way because they come out, they're fully. I mean, I actually did go back and rewrite Calling in the One after almost 20 years. So 2021 is a new version of Calling in the One because I had so many of those little things. So one of the things I wish I had explored more in the book, we touched on it. It's this phenomenon of when an ex is hating on you. That's very hard to tolerate. I didn't really go into it with the level of depth that I think it deserves, because that's a really tough one, because we are connected in the way that we've been talking. I say, you know, the relationship doesn't end because you've given the keys to the condo back. We are all connected. So even if you don't see someone for several years, if they have a story on you, or if they're being, you know, undermining of you, you really do have to find a way to energetically protect yourself against that. You know, it is a bit of a spiritual warfare sometimes, and I want to validate that, because it's not something we talk about a lot, and it can be overcome, but it will require you to really be in your highest self, to be responsible for having gotten involved with a person who is that, you know, undeveloped. Let's call them undeveloped. That they need to. By the way, another person might form a bad story about you just because that's kind of it's kind of a shortcut to breaking up. They're trying to spare themselves the actual impact of the loss of who you are in their lives and how much they do love you. So very often they'll do that to distance. That's hard to take. Yeah.
And so just real quick, like, how do we energetically protect ourselves, or is it
well,
soul
you
to
can.
soul?
Well, you do also. You do things.
Yes.
You know, that's where you're working with a Reiki worker, or people who do energy work like that can be very helpful. If you do a soul to soul, you can put up, as I said, you make them very small. You can actually say, "I need you to stop and, you know, chill out."
Cool.
And this is unacceptable and inappropriate. And you imagine, like, you know, fire around you so that you are safe and you are protected. And you do your daily practice. You keep yourself strong.
Okay,
You
cool.
know?
Thank
Yeah.
you. I love that. Awesome. Well, where can people follow you, get ready for the next book, get Conscious Uncoupling and Calling in the
thank
One?
you.
I also need to order Calling in the One, clearly. You know, I'm in that phase now. Yeah.
Thank you. So, at consciousuncoupling.com or callingintheone.com. They both have free 45-minute seminars where you can come, and I'll guide you through practices and things, and just stay close. And the next book comes out in January, and I'd love to come back and
You
talk
are
about
coming
it
back.
more.
That would be so great. Thank you, Katherine.
Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you for listening to the Heal with Kelly podcast. Be sure to tune in every Thursday for more empowering wisdom and inspiring healing stories. And make sure you hit the follow button on Apple, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts so you don't miss that one episode that holds the answer you've been searching for. Oh, and if you found this episode inspiring, please rate, review, and share Heal with Kelly so that we can grow our audience and reach more people. We truly appreciate it. Lots of love.